I went to seminary with a woman named Betty Weaver. Her father physically abused her all through her growing up. That culminated when she was 15 years old and he beat her with a lead pipe. When she recovered enough to leave the house, she ran away. She married a boy from their hometown who turned out to be alcoholic and abusive, and she just thought that's the way the world is. She continued thinking that's the way the world is until she came home early from work one day and discovered her husband was having an affair with the babysitter. In desperation, she ran to the minister at their Baptist church and said, "What am I going to do?" And he said, "If you were a submissive wife, this wouldn't have happened to you." And when we tell her, "Why don't you come to church and learn about God who's like a father?" is it any wonder that sounds more like threat than promise to her? Do you know the span of distance grace has to travel to find its way into her heart? Some people just flat don't trust God. Because of something that's happened, because of something they've seen, they believe the word, the lie from the serpent from the beginning, that God is trying to take something from you, not to give something to you. The point is this, that some people look at the world and they say, there can't be a king. There's not a God who's over this. And yet our confession of faith remains in the same way that Barack Obama is the President of the United States, that is true whether we choose to receive that truth or not. We confess that King Jesus is Lord over all creation. And that King Jesus is Lord is powerfully good news for us. Because the king has power in his domain. The sovereign has authority over the place where he reigns. When Gerald Ford became President of the United States, a little bit after a year after Richard Nixon resigned in the wake of the Watergate scandal, President Ford issued a pardon to former President Nixon. There were some people who said this was all, the fix was in. Before Nixon ever left the office, he worked out a deal with Ford. Other people said, no, it's just not right, it's not fair, but that's the way the world is, and we all know that that's the way the world is. What President Ford said on September 8th, 1974 on live television was that the story of Richard Nixon was an American tragedy in which we had all played a part. President Ford said, I realized that this story could go on and on and on until somebody writes an end to it. He said, I realized that I was the only person who could do that, and if I can, then I must do it. So Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon. He said he pardoned Richard Nixon because he did not believe that the nation could go forward divided and wounded as it was. He decided to take that pain on himself, knowing what it would do to his own presidency, knowing that that was the only way to heal the country, and knowing that in our system, only the president has the authority to pardon that kind of crime. The testimony of our faith is that Jesus Christ has pardoned our sin. That He has taken the punishment of that sin into His own body. He issued a pardon not with the stroke of a pen, but with the strike of a hammer. He took that pain into Himself to transform and redeem us because He could not stand being separated from His children, knowing what it would do to His body, knowing it was the only hope for our bodies. It turns out in politics, there is real privilege. But for Jesus, there was a passion. In politics, you can be full of yourself, but when you are the passionate one, you have to empty yourself, have to be obedient unto death, even death on a cross. That's our confession. Barack Obama is the President of the United States. You can believe that or not. You may choose to like Barack Obama and dislike George W. Bush. You may like George W. Bush and dislike Barack Obama. You may be like, as in the most recent polls that have come out, more than half of all Americans who don't like either one of them. Doesn't really matter. There is very little expectation about what you will do with a belief about who is President of the United States. But if you confess with your mouth, King Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you have been saved. You have been transferred from this present evil age and into the age to come. Your citizenship has been moved from the United States of America to the kingdom of God, and now you are an ambassador of Christ. As though Christ is making his appeal through you, you are taking on a ministry of reconciliation to bring God and the world back together, that the kingdom may come and his will may be done through us as it is in heaven. That's our call. The root affirmation of our faith is that the crucified Messiah is king over the universe. The one who died at Golgotha and has been raised in glory is now king over all creation. And if you are looking for a simple, single-word descriptor of who God is or what God is like, you need to look no farther than the word love. It's the first verse we all learned. For God so the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that through him the world might be saved. 1 John chapter 4 says, those who do not love do not know God, for God is. That's right. If you're looking for the clearest and most concise way to describe who God is, look no farther than love. Because God is love, and because God is the creator of all things, the very fabric of creation, the way the world has been put together is through love. We are created in love, by love, to be loving. We are to be people who give ourselves in service to others. We're to be people who consider others more honorable than ourselves. We are to be people who tend to each other because we know who God is. And so we know who we are, and we know what our responsibilities are in the world. Soren Kierkegaard tells the story about a young prince, the only son of the king. And while he was still young, unexpectedly and suddenly his father died. No one thought he was ready to assume the kingship. But after an appropriate period of mourning, he was nonetheless invested with the authority of state. The crown rested on his head.